Hi, I'm Anthony James. Back in 1994 I used to run a UFO group here in Nottingham. We had two guest speakers come over from America to give a lecture, shows around the Bentwaters base and the events of what happened at Bentwaters, Capel Green, known as the Bentwaters incident, the UFO incident. 2 weeks after being down in Rendlesham Forest, Larry Warren and Peter Robbins came up to Nottingham. They gave the first ever lecture at the Baseford Centre in Nottingham. I filmed that, I put that on YouTube, and the day after that lecture in March 1994 I had a one-on-one interview with Larry Warren. I don't hold any camps of either in the Peter Robbins camp or the Larry Warren camp. I'm not bothered. To me, this is just a record of the event, of the recording. I've become aware there's a lot of people that are after footage or interviews of anything connected to this subject, to the Bentwaters UFO, Larry Warren, Peter Robbins and all that kind of stuff. So, like I said, this is a record of the event. It's video footage I've had for 25 years. It's now 2019. This was recorded in March 1994. Like I said, it's March 2019 now, so it's 25 years. And yeah, this is the footage. Like I said, I don't want any bashing on my YouTube page. It's a record of event, and that's it. Enjoy. Hello, my name's Anthony James, and I'm interviewing Larry Warren, who was an eyewitness at Bentwaters in Suffolk in 1980 after the UFO landing outside Woodbridge on Capel Green. Larry, could you tell us briefly what happened on the first two nights of the events, and could you clarify the dates, please?
Well, on the first two nights of events at Bentwaters I wasn't involved in, but from what I know from first-hand witnesses, was a series of events took place, beginning with lights being seen from Eastgate on RAF Woodbridge. What was assumed to be an aircraft crashing in the forest was investigated by 3 Air Force security police. They were given permission to go off the base, go out into the woods. They came upon a triangular craft. They followed this object through the pine forest. It had to be rather small to maneuver through the trees, but they pursued it for a good hour and a half, and they finally lost it. Before they knew it, they went into a clearing, and in this clearing was this object brightly illuminated. One of the officers involved had a sidearm, a .38 caliber pistol, and drew his weapon and was about to fire on it when the object turned itself off, as if you turn a TV off, and as a small dot, and that small dot of light flew away. 4 hours went by. These 3 airmen were missing in the forest. They couldn't be reached by radio or anything. And finally, by the end of it, they were found wandering aimlessly through the woods by other Air Force people that were sent out to get them, and wrote their reports. Nevertheless, I have heard regressive hypnosis done on 2 of the individuals involved, not the third one, and a full-scale abduction scenario exists. This information hasn't been released yet by these people. The very next night was a series of sightings. This is the best we can determine. The dates, and that's vague because I know some people that were peripherally involved in that, but there were more just observations in the sky. On the date of the first night's events was on the evening of the 26th of December into the morning of the 27th. The following night would have been the 27th into the 28th, and the third night, thus my involvement, would be the 28th into the 29th of December 1980, which was, I think, a Tuesday night.
Yeah. What happened immediately after the event at Capel Green?
Well, what happened to me, I don't know how the event terminated. I heard stories that this thing flew off at a tremendous rate of speed, quote unquote, but I didn't see that happen. I went back to the base, sat around for a while drinking coffee, was in shock. I was with other Air Force guys that went through it, security police. The day shift was coming on, A flight, and everyone had heard some account of these events going on, it seemed, and they were making fun of us, and little green men stories, and all that, and we were relieved from duty. I went back to my room, sat around, put on an Eric Clapton record, and which was Blues Power, the song on it, I'll never forget it, and just sat there and just tried to wonder what was going on. I had an awful taste in my mouth. I had some gray hair, which I mean, noticeably gray, and my eyes hurt. They were watering profusely. It seemed like a dream. I never did sleep that night. After a while, I went and had breakfast and was with other security police who went to the event. And I tried to raise because someone else actually asked me a question about it, you know, what happened to us. And I started to say something, and another sergeant who was involved in the first night's events, by the way, also told me to shut up with a few other words. And later that day, we were debriefed.
You mentioned that a craft appeared on the pathway between the patrolman, when the patrolman went back to where the armoured vehicle was. So you mentioned that a craft appeared on the pathway between the patrolman and Eastgate. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, I can tell you what I was told by witnesses that were there. I had left already. I didn't see this happen. I heard about it. What happened after they had sent us back to Bentwaters, different vehicles with the light-alls and the lighting equipment and all, there was still a great deal of personnel still in this clearing where all the vehicles parked. The funny thing is that these objects and lights and strange beings, which have been denied so often but nevertheless were there, were in this parking area. They actually followed people down the trail. One person, John Burroughs, who was a law enforcement police officer, a whole different job than I did, was there also, but he was only allowed to go that far because he was off duty. It was felt that he was very obsessed because he was involved in the first night's events. And what happened there is that one of these creatures, or illuminated beings, went right through the windshield of a security police pickup truck, right in front of the face of the driver. The driver, who was security police, kicked the windscreen out of the vehicle, and this creature or whatever floated out to a beam of light that came from an unseen object over the pine trees, and seemed to run up this light and disappear, up the beam and disappear. And that's the description I have. They would also another triangular object, small, much like the first night's events, appeared right in the midst of all these people. John Burroughs, who hasn't publicly said this yet, he told this directly to me. It's rumored, but it is true apparently. Grabbed onto this object. That's dedication in my book. But and it moved 25 feet or 35 feet with him holding onto it. And it's
was this a round sphere or a triangular object?
The triangular
object.
Solid object. I didn't see the littler one. The one I saw was substantially larger.
What was your reaction of your colleagues when they headed back to base?
Oh, well, we didn't talk much. We were in the back of a pickup truck in the middle of December, so it was, we were trying to stay warm at that point, but no one really discussed it. We just stared at each other, and my thoughts were that, well, if I know about this happening, then it's going to be on every newspaper in the world that day. I mean, it had to be known. How could they keep that quiet?
What happened immediately after the incident, such as debriefing?
Well, after the incident, we were indeed debriefed. It was a strange procedure. We were told to meet at the Chief of Security Police's office, which would have been Major Malcolm Ziegler, at 11 o'clock that following morning on the 29th. Myself and other lower-ranking Air Force personnel, security police, met around that time. In fact, I was a little late by about a minute or two and was reprimanded for it. We were in uniform. In fact, we were asked specifically to wear the same uniforms we were wearing earlier that morning at the site. The first thing that happened when we got there is that we had disaster preparedness Sergeant Neville's go over our clothing with a Geiger counter, and it was one of the individuals had something that gave a reading. I don't know what it was. It was taken away from him, put in a container, but I observed that happening. We were told by our Chief of Security Police and also Major Carl Drury, who is a Assistant Deputy Chief of Security Police, that we were going to be debriefed, and we were going to have the debriefing in the office, and we were to cooperate with the debriefers. I saw some very fancy cars outside of the office. And this was on the main gate. If you look in the main gate of Bentwaters, which you have some footage of, you'll find that office would have been just up that road. Yeah. We walked in and we signed, first of all, a series of 10 documents. Some of them were just your traditional security oaths and things that we had already signed. The next series was most interesting, was that it was a pre-written statement of what we supposedly saw. It was typewritten, had the Air Force letterhead, but unfortunately every single one of the statements read exactly alike. And it stated that we were off duty and we saw lights in the trees, and that was it. And we had to sign them, no questions asked, and our Social Security number. We moved on into the chief's office. They cleared out the law enforcement desk. There was no people around that weren't involved in these events. We get inside there. First of all, there was a gentleman I noticed right away in a naval uniform of an officer's rank, which was very unusual because we're on an Air Force base. American Navy, by the way. And two gentlemen in business suits. Not men in black, nothing like that. Just gentlemen dressed very sharply in business suits with plastic laminated ID badges on the upper left lapel with their pictures. It turned out that they were from an organization called the Armed Forces Security Services. Through our research, we find that that is a field arm of the National Security Agency in the United States, the highest secret agency in the country of the United States. And the naval gentleman was from the Office of Naval Intelligence from London. He was the chief debriefer. I can't tell you exactly verbatim what was said. It was really kind of a propaganda thing, be true to the flag and all this. There was a gentleman next to me reading a Bible. He was so freaked out because of what happened. He was from the Bible Belt. There was a lot of Midwestern guys that just got trashed because of this mentally. And they went through the other two guys who basically watched our reactions. I don't know what they were there particularly to do. But the naval gentleman, and he was a Commander Green was his name, no pun intended, but that was his name on his ID. Well, the funny thing is that as he looked at all of us, he was telling us that this phenomenon had been going on longer than we'd been around. We could be very cooperative by not talking about it on the base, the events we saw, because there's a lot more to it than we were aware. And we wouldn't be speaking from a position of knowledge. And they didn't say UFOs, aliens, flying saucers, any of those things. We weren't under hot lights. It was just a semi-informal debriefing. And we were told our security clearances would be upgraded. Now, I've heard all these stories about super triple X clearance and all this crap, but quite frankly, I had a secret clearance to work around nuclear weapons. They told us that we were upgraded to a top secret clearance. Now, that wasn't doing us a favor. The explanation was that should we divulge what happened to us, the penalties for doing so would be stiffer if we were holding a top secret clearance. I have my doubts that we were upgraded to any top secret clearance because it takes a long time, you can't just give a clearance like that to somebody. I think that was propaganda and, psychological warfare. We were very young. I was 19. Most of the other guys in the room were my age and just a year younger. So very impressionable. And the event went on, and they told us it's been going on for a long time, and not to write anybody about it, not to talk on the phone about it, which I did immediately after anyway to my mother, and I paid a price for that. So, and we were shown a film too, which was pretty bizarre.
You also stated on location at Capel Green that the event was filmed by the forces. Can you tell us what happened to the film?
Oh, I wish I could tell you that I had it in my suitcase, but Tony, the funny thing about the film is that indeed I have said from when I became public in this 1982, I said that these events were filmed and photographed, and the funny thing is that when CNN did their program in 1984, Captain Mike Verano verified exactly what I had said happened. He said that there was filmed extensively. The film canister, this is as far as we know what happened to it, a canister of actual motion picture film of the UFO on the third night was brought to RAF Bentwaters by the wing commander, which would have been at the time, Colonel Gordon Williams. He was driven by another security police officer, Sergeant Adrian Bastinza, another key player in this, who was with me in the events. Drove to the tarmac. There was a waiting F-16 aircraft. They're very fast, and Bentwaters didn't have them, so they brought this in for a specific reason, for high-speed transport of something very important. The film was contained in a metallic canister. Under heavy guard, it was brought to the aircraft. The aircraft landed, canopy open. The film was passed to the pilot or the weapons officer and back in a satchel. The aircraft canopy left, and the plane took off and went to Germany. It went to Ramstein Air Base in Germany. The film was turned over to 3rd Air Force Headquarters. The film remained in Germany for quite a long time and underwent analysis. The photographs were developed. There were site investigative teams that were sent from 3rd Air Force back to Bentwaters, and much work, further follow-up was done on the area. We had as late as 1988 or 89, and I believe Jenny Randall's or Cliff Stone, somebody had come up with, made contact with a woman who was peripherally involved with the distribution of this film footage. And she said, yes, though some of the pictures were fogged, and she goes, the motion pictures did survive, and a lot of the pictures, the still photographs, still exist. They've been taken to the United States and are where probably all the other film footage is stored.
You stated earlier that you believe the whole event could have been planned. Why do you believe that?
Well, there's no question that on the night I was involved, we were in a heightened state of readiness. The bases were on alert at the time. And I honestly don't think that had anything to do with particularly the UFOs, because there was trouble in Poland at the time with Soviet tanks about to move in on the Solidarity movement. But because of the previous nights of events, I don't think it was unexpected. A lot of the people, like John Burroughs told me, that after his event happened to him that first night, he and others with him knew these things were coming back.
Why do you believe the event could have been planned?
Thank you for bringing my brain cells back. Planned, I think, is too much like Close Encounters, the movie. But I do think my impression of pre-planning was simply this. When Gordon Williams, who was our wing commander, who was present and who had interaction with another life form, I'll state it till it's proven otherwise, and then I'll apologize for being wrong. But he and a few other senior people had in their demeanor something that told me that they had at one time or another been trained on how to deal with the possibility of such an event, how to react, how to respond to it. Do you approach it? Do you whatever? It seemed that it didn't seem like just off the cuff, let's walk toward this thing. And it strikes me as unusual that if you believe what I'm saying, or even a quarter of what I'm saying, why we would have been allowed to be in such close proximity to these objects. Something had to have been known.
Did any military personnel go out to the UFO site at Capel Green on the fourth night? What was the atmosphere like with the men on the fourth night? Did they expect any more sightings?
On the fourth night, which would have been the next night, there's elements to my story and a few other guys that take a very strange twist, and I couldn't tell you exactly what was going on or where I was on that fourth night. That's something I've saved for the book, and it will either be accepted or rejected and whatever. As far as what I've heard in the past years, funny enough, we interviewed Colonel Charles I. Halt last year in Washington, D.C. Probably the most extensive interview anyone has conducted with him about these events. And he was also my deputy base commander, and he told us one almost sad kind of story, had a little humor in it, that one of the individuals involved was so obsessed, and I do remember some of this, with these events that he remained in the forest for 2 weeks and wouldn't come out of the forest. So people would bring him food and blankets. And finally he came back in. He just knew they would come back. There were a lot of parties, not parties with beer or anything, but there was a lot of groups of guys that would take their girlfriends and families out to the woods in the ensuing weeks. I don't know about the fourth night so much as, I think there was a lot of security. Most of the forest was considered off limits after that for quite a while to Air Force personnel.
Can you tell us about when you phoned your mother the following day?
Yeah.
Briefly.
Yeah, my mom has the distinction of being the first civilian that I'm aware of in the United States of America that knew of these events, because after we were told not to use the phones or write letters, I ran to a public phone with Airman Greg Battram, who was another witness to these events also, and called my mother. I reversed the charges, and I figured I wouldn't get nicked because I did that. And I got her on the phone, and she accepted the charges, and I said, the best of my recollection, I said, Mom, you're never going to believe what I saw last night. We saw a UFO landed on the base, and I realized that she wasn't answering me, and I was just talking to nothing. She was gone. I didn't hear the click or the phone get disengaged. Well, I looked at Greg Battram, and I said, I think I've gotten cut off. So I called the operator, and I said, I reversed the charges, rehook me up. And she goes, are you calling from the base? And I said, yes. And she said, well, you were cut off from the base. I knew I was in trouble at this point because the phones were all monitored. I was so naive not to even think that. And especially after these events, the security measures were extremely upgraded. Colonel Halt makes a position that the phone system in England is very antiquated. But on a NATO air base of that magnitude, the security is very, very formidable. Electronic security and so forth. And I had had extensive training in that, and I was just so anxious to talk to someone. So I ran back to my room, and within an hour I had a notice to report to the Hardened Communications Center for questioning, which I denied everything until they played back the tape of my phone call. I was fined. I chose the fine instead of losing my stripes. I only had 2. And in I left the Air Force owing them $95 on that fine. In 1986, I was quite public in this sort of thing, and I got a letter, just as an amendment to the story, I got a letter from the Department of the Air Force Accounting Department in Denver, Colorado. And I was still, it was more of the hype of Bentwaters at the time. Well, I opened the letter, and it stated that, Mr. Warren, you left the United States Air Force in 1981 owing $95.68 on, and they didn't list a reason or anything. And if you don't pay it, we'll be forced to turn you over to the Internal Revenue Service, and it'll be deducted from your taxes, and you'll have bad credit and all this. Well, I simply wrote back a letter saying, Dear Department of the Air Force Accounting Department, if you can demonstrate and list exactly why I incurred that debt, I will be glad to remit the amount to you in full. I never heard from them again. I never had a problem with the IRS, and I never had a bad credit report.
Can you enlighten us about the blue beams that was coming from the UFOs and the nuclear weapons area?
Yeah, I didn't experience the beams so much, but after talking to so many of the players that were involved, and Colonel Holt, when he is candid, he's quite candid and was very descriptive. They would shoot down and hit the ground in almost the width of a pencil. That's how small. They weren't large beams. They're about the size of my finger. But almost like solid light coming down. Green, blue, red, all different colors. Sadly, what we've learned is that, and probably what contributes to why these events were covered up so badly, is that some of these objects at will, in fact on the Halt tape, which I've given you permission to reproduce and deal with as you like, as it's an important document and gotten it to you. It's important to know that these objects were, no one, they weren't stopped from shooting beams into our hardened, earth-covered mounds in the weapon storage area where we store nuclear weapons. And some of the weapons were adversely affected by this. They're tactical nukes. And RAF Bentwaters, as you know, was the what had the most nuclear weapons in all of NATO, which we was lied about. Scary thing.
You was responsible for bringing the Holt document to our attention. Can you tell us about that and how the Holt tape came out?
I will indeed. I can't take full credit for the Holt document being released, but unfortunately through the years I've never been given credit for its release except way back in the book Clear Intent by Fawcett and Greenwood. I gave the information that I was willing to impart with in 1982 to researcher Larry Fawcett of Connecticut. Those gentlemen were looking into, with Robert Todd from Citizens Against UFO Secrecy, FOIA released documents, Freedom of Information Act released documents on UFOs. I found it highly unlikely that they'd get anything on the story I told them. But they nevertheless, based on the information I supplied them, filed a claim with that organization for any information on these events at Bentwaters. After 5 denials by a Kathleen McCullum, I believe, who was, just a bold-faced liar, I have to say, about the events, the document was released by your government and the Ministry of Defense as a courtesy. It made absolutely no sense, and though I'm very critical about the contents of the Halt document, it indeed reads like science fiction. The dates are wrong. It was written 2 weeks after the fact. It misrepresents a series of events lasting over 3 days and condenses them and minimalizes them. But nevertheless, the document is important on its own, but it's not 100% truthful. And one has to ask themselves, why would a document like that be written 2 weeks later? There's no logic there. I had already written letters to the states before describing these events almost virtually covertly, because if it was read, I didn't want them thinking I was giving up everything. But I have a letter I sent to my mother that reads exactly like the Halt document. We have the postmark and everything. It was written a week before Halt wrote the document. But all I was doing was condensing the events.
How did you come across the tape, the actual Halt tape?
Well, how I came across it, Jenny Randall's, funny enough, here in Great Britain, was doing her work on the event, and they had heard, if I remember correctly, they had been played a portion of the tape. They were being played with and toyed with by the Department of the Air Force over here. We've seen cablegrams where it was like, let's destroy these women, basically. Dot Street and Brenda Butler and Jenny. And they may be aware of that by now, but funny enough, they had been teased with this tape. The way I have it, how the tape came out, and then how it got to me, is that Solicitor Harry Harris, here in Great Britain, uh, was given the tape by a colonel who was a friend of Holt's on Bentwaters, because the colonel did not believe in UFOs. So there's no logic here. The tape is 18 minutes of 4 hours. It's edited down. Nevertheless, it is authentic. It is what you hear. You're hearing actual security police transmissions, Holt's and others near him, their reactions on the third night of events. This is not the first night at all. The tape went through a lot of channels. How I got it is that in 1984, Nippon Television, Junichi Aoi, who's a researcher and broadcaster from Japan, came to my house in Connecticut, USA, and were doing pre-interviews before I went to Japan to do a series of programs on the Bentwaters incidents. And brought with him, he kept saying to me, "Have you heard the tape?" I'm like, "What tape is he talking about? You know, a Wham tape?" I had no idea what the man meant. And he played it, and my family were there, and I almost fainted. I was like, "Oh my God, we need this. Finally, here it is." And this is the first time the tape was in the States. Ray Boucher, another researcher in the state, claims to be the first one to have it. I was here, I had the tape before anyone in America had it. But Junichi Aoi told me that the only way I could get it is to go to Japan, and he considered passing it on to me. Well, I would have gone to Japan on my own money simply to get that tape. I got it, I brought it back to the United States, and though I promised not to share it with anyone, I immediately gave it to CNN. Chuck DeCaro, who was doing the piece called Bentwaters, the UFO or whatever, Special Assignments, which was CNN's highest rated special assignment to date, took the tape, integrated it into the program, had it analyzed, had it verified, and there it rolled. That's how it got into America, and it was through me. I brought it in.
Do you have any theory of why this UFO event actually took place between the two Air Force bases?
Oh, I think the phenomenon is indigenous to that area. I think it's something that's always been with that area in Suffolk. And I don't think I can honestly say why or how. I think that's why I'm in this, to find out those answers.
And finally, before this encounter at Vendlesham Forest, the basic history of the air base was passed down to new arrivals at the base, and the story was basically about a ghost near the base itself.
That's right.
Can you tell us how this changed during your return visits to the base?
Well, yeah, unfortunately, I think the Bentwaters UFO incidents put a very famous ghost out of business at Bentwaters. When I first arrived on the base, there were 3 stories that we were told to kind of scare us. And I do believe there was substance to at least one of them, and that was East End Charlie, who was a Nazi or Luftwaffe pilot shot down, burned alive by the townspeople in Woodbridge, and for bombing their gardens and houses and things. And he was said to walk around the base at night, go over to the Air Rescue Recovery Squadron, salute the senior officers, and whatever. It's hard to believe an enemy ghost would do that, but nevertheless, I never saw that. There was another story of a lady without a face who rode a bicycle around the back roads, and I've always been perplexed on how she got a bicycle. That was scarier than her no face. What was that about? And then there was the Black Dog of Suffolk, who is not the Warnocks, these friends of ours. They have a black dog. We call him that, but the original Black Dog of Suffolk is this giant kind of Rottweiler with red eyes, and that is supposedly seen in the area. So you arrive on a base like that with all kinds of folklore, if anything, just really scary stories. And the Druids and the witchcraft. And Butley Village. Don't go there because the whole town is full of witches. Well, God knows. We were 19. They're fun stories. On our return, I returned in 1985 with my wife on my honeymoon and found that everyone knew Sky Crash had been out at the time and was being sold on the base. That's where I bought my copy at Stars and Stripes on RAF Bentwaters. It was a very popular book with the Air Force people there, and obviously these events replaced anything, any ghost story, anything. Peter Robbins, and my co-author, and I returned in '88 for our first research trip to the area. The bases were still functional. and talked to a number of people that said it's the first thing they hear when they get to the base about the UFO, and they basically have the story very accurately.
You used to go into the canteens and on your return visits back to the base
Yeah.
and talk to the new recruits who
Right.
wasn't there at the time.
Right. Well, I was kind of partial to that because I saw myself in those guys, and I was getting older, and I could say, God, I know how they feel. It's a very lonely job in security police, and you're away from home, and but boy, and then they find out you're an actual witness to the event. It's like, let's be quiet, let's go out quietly. When I was back there, honestly, in 1988, that was the last time I was here when the bases were functioning. I was picked up on RAF Bentwaters by law enforcement because I was, who was this guy wandering around with a camera? And I was taken to the deputy base commander's office, which I don't recall his name. It wasn't Colonel Holt. Holt had left already years before. And I was asked specifically why, who was I, what was I doing? My hair was longer, so obviously I was in the military. And I explained outright. I said, I went through these events. I'm here researching a book. I don't mean to cause trouble. And we're just talking to people. And no problem. The base commander was very polite. He said, do me a favor. Don't stir up the young people. He goes, they get very obsessed with that thing. And, we want their focus on the jobs. And we don't want them being afraid to work out in the flight lines. And I said, agreed, no problem. And we were allowed to walk as free as we possibly could in non-restrictive areas.
All right, Larry Warren, thank you very much.
Thank you.